Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations. If there is anything that is easily understood in the Church in our time, is that the man that the world sees as Supreme Pontiff doesn't really care much for the faith. As the meme says, he's not really a fan of Catholicism. Francis was the one who, at the start of his reign, said that he was probably going to be the cause of a schism, and later he bragged that he was only doing the job he was elevated to the papacy to do, a job that was agreed upon with the men who helped make him pope. This revelation didn't cause the stir it should have, nor did it bring back the memories of the St. Gallen group for most people, and the rest that we know had been planning to renew the Church into oblivion for some time. Now, today I have a story about Francis's next alleged phase of renewal for the Church, which includes a total ban of traditional rites of ordination and rites of confirmation that may be coming before this coming Easter, which means no traditional sacraments outside of the SSPX may be in the works. This story bears all the hallmarks of the warning from the early days of the Francis reign of doom. So let's revisit a piece of important modern Catholic history to really understand this development. The story of the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate is instructive here. Everything that happened to the traditional group of Franciscan friars was later wrought onto the priests of the Church broadly and is being wrought as we speak. If you're not familiar with that story, it sets a good context for what I'm talking about today. The Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate were a group of traditional Franciscans dedicated to the traditional Franciscan charism, which is not a works-based false gospel like we see so much of in the Church these days. Now, this ruffled Francis's feathers back in 2013 because he's all about the works and not much about anything else. And so he sent an apostolic visitation to their headquarters, which is a fancy modernist way of saying he sent his henchmen to pay them a visit. This excerpt from a Catholic News Agency article from 2013 really sounds familiar by now. Quote, "The Vatican Congregation for Religious, with the approval of Pope Francis, has appointed a commissioner to oversee the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate and has restricted their celebration of the traditional Latin Mass, touching off a storm of speculation about the reasons and broader implications. The news of the decree was first reported by the veteran Vatican journalist Sandro Magister, who described the move as the first time that Pope Francis has contradicted his predecessor, Benedict XVI. But what is most astonishing are the last 5 lines of the decree of July 11th, writes Magister. The declaration's final paragraph reads, "In addition to the above, the Holy Father Francis has directed that every religious of the congregation of the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate is required to celebrate the liturgy according to the ordinary rite, and that if the occasion should arise, the use of the extraordinary form, the Vetus Ordo, must be explicitly authorized by the competent authorities for every religious and or community that makes the request. The astonishment stems from the fact that what is decreed contradicts the dispositions given by Benedict XVI, which for the celebration of the Mass in the ancient rite, sine populo, demand no previous request for authorization whatsoever," Magister explains. The decree was signed by the Vatican Congregation's prefect, Cardinal João Breis de Vaz, and its secretary, Archbishop José Rodriguez Carballo. Capuchin Father Fendenzio Volpi was named in the declaration as the commissioner, and he will be required to submit a written report every 6 months to the Vatican Dicastery. End quote. Now that all sounds familiar because in the summer of 2021, the rumors circulating Rome for the past 2 years came to fruition. These same standards were applied to the Church broadly and by the same actors. Traditionis Custodes is old news by now, and some say that it wasn't that bad because the Latin Mass still exists in some places in the Church. Why we have such low standards for what constitutes good news these days. Those who say that fail to understand that the purpose is to stamp out the last vestiges of the Catholic faith from the Church that existed before the devastation of the modernist triumph of Vatican II. While Traditionis Custodes wasn't well received by many of the bishops, the Vatican is now moving forward with plans to build on this. Bear the story of the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate in mind, because all your favorite former Ecclesia Dei groups like the FSSP and the Institute of Christ the King are going to get renewed in the same way. Rorate Celli has this report from a French-language outlet detailing the likely next step of the plan, and it comes from the same sources who correctly warned us about Traditionis Custodes before its release. Quote, "A process along the lines of the Franciscans of the Immaculate could be applied to the Ecclesia Dei communities with a commissarization of these institutes for the purpose of introducing the new Mass in their seminaries. This would mean sinking them quickly by emptying them of their specific attraction for the young people who today flock to them, the Tridentine liturgy. Today's Rome is playing with priestly lives and vocations in this way. When such lives and vocations were considered useful, they were stimulated, and now, under the belief that they must be got rid of, Rome does so without a second thought, with the Machiavellian oblivion of commitments made to these communities. Recently, the German website Summorum Pontificum published a report, translated and distributed by the American website Rorate Caeli, according to which the Congregation for Religious is preparing to launch a canonical visit to the priestly fraternity of St. Peter, the Institute of Christ the King, and the Institute of the Good Shepherd, as early as February 2022. Apparently, Rome is of the opinion that the status of the communities as societies of pontifical right opens up immediate possibilities of access. For this purpose, papal delegates could be appointed, who, although they would not replace the existing superior, as would a commissioner appointed by the Congregation of Religious Orders, would nevertheless be superior to him. These papal delegates would instruct superiors to take all necessary measures to reconcile their communities with the spirit of the Council, the spirit of Vatican II. Yay! And as a fundamental first step towards this, to order the general celebration of the Reformed liturgy. On this basis, plans for its inclusion in pastoral care could then be developed in collaboration with local bishops. End lengthy quote. Now recall what I said a moment ago. The Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate, a traditional monastic order of Franciscan monks, was smashed to pieces by Francis and rebuilt in his modernist image, and it is now a lot smaller and not exactly vibrant. That order is now nearly dead, with little to no vocations, its devotion to the traditional Franciscan charism removed, as well as its devotion to the traditional liturgy. Some of its members have been scattered and serve as semi-independent traditional priests, including in the United States. The story of the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate is the often cited tragedy among traditional Catholics, who have been warning since the beginning of this alleged pontificate that the contemplative religious orders and every aspect of traditional Catholicism was going to come under attack by Francis and his modernist band of misfits in Rome. Now, that's not news now, of course, but here's where it gets bad, or even worse. The same source in Rome that reported Traditionis Custodes was coming, weeks and months ahead of time, are now reporting that along with the forthcoming apostolic visitation to the head offices of the FSSP and similar groups is coming another attack of a different kind, an attack on traditional ordinations and the FSSP seminaries themselves, as well as the traditional rite of confirmation that your children and grandchildren, or that your friends who are coming into the church, would access themselves. From the same article, quote, "But another recent rumor, which we share with our readers with all due caution, although it comes from reliable and concordant sources, indicates that the blow could first come from the Congregation for Divine Worship, whose new prefect is the English prelate Archbishop Arthur Roche, and whose secretary, the second most important figure in the congregation, is Archbishop Vittorio Francesco Viola, 55 years old, a Franciscan, and former Bishop of Tortona, and former professor for the Pontifical University of St. Anselm. It is well known that a letter from the Vicar of Rome for the Pope, Cardinal Angelo de Donatis, dated October 7, 2021, took a number of steps more restrictive than the terms of Traditionis Custodes. The letter was presumably written by Father Giuseppe Medili, director of the Vicariate's liturgical office and a professor at the Pontifical University of St. Anselm, where plans to combat the traditional liturgy were concocted. It was decided that the ceremonies of the Easter Triduum could no longer be celebrated according to the traditional form, and that the celebration of the sacraments other than the Eucharist was no longer permitted. According to this letter, it is now obligatory in Rome to give sacramental absolution, confer extreme unction or confirmation, and, if necessary, do ordinations, only according to the books of Paul VI's liturgy. This decision, taken in the Pope's diocese, had all the appearance of a trial balloon, and indeed, according to our sources, the regime it sets forth would be extended to all of Latin Christendom very quickly, before Christmas, by a text or an instruction from the Congregation for Divine Worship. It is possible that this text, which is currently being prepared, will not be as rigid as the letter of Cardinal de Donatis, especially with regard to personal parishes, meaning it might be possible to celebrate the traditional Easter Triduum in personal parishes. On the other hand, the prohibition of traditional Roman pontifical ceremonies could well be included. Everywhere? On all occasions? If this were the case, it would mean that the confirmations or ordinations in the traditional form would no longer be permitted. If this information turned out to be true, the attack on the seminaries or of traditional communities would be more rapid and more radical than that envisaged by means of canonical visitations. the very specificity of these seminaries would be affected, as they would be forbidden to have traditional ordinations. One can easily imagine the devastating effect on the vocations that these communities attract." End quote. Now, some may object to talking about these rumors, but remember this. The only thing we all got wrong with Traditionis Custodes when talking about it when it was only a rumor in the year or so before it was released is that we all were wrong in predicting how bad it would be. We all thought it would be milder, and instead we got something that is clearly meant to end the Latin Mass within the next couple of years. And now we know that the Latin form of the document is set to be issued as well, meaning Traditionis Custodes will have the binding force of canon law behind it, at least those who believe that the Pope can decree anything that he wants to, it was binding on the faithful, and that's not true. And that the Latin version will, of course, tighten up some of the loopholes that have been exploited by bishops intent on keeping the traditional faith alive in their dioceses, and I reported on that last week. But this has been expected for some time now. The visitation not only to the bishops of the FSSP, but to their seminaries. That happens. All bets are off. The purpose of Traditionis Custodes, according to Paca Papa Francis, is to eventually see the return of laity who are devoted to the traditional sacraments to the Novus Ordo. It is even planned to have a special catechist ready to teach all of us the joys of modernism upon our return to their group hug kumbaya parishes that our forebears in the faith would have thought were Protestant prayer halls, not Catholic churches. Francis himself said that was the purpose, and if that is going to happen, he must end the line of traditional priests in the mainline church, and he must cut off access to the traditional sacraments. Full stop. What that will look like is anyone's guess, but at the very least expect a letter from the Vatican when that happens, and it will almost certainly, at bare minimum, prohibit the traditional sacraments from being offered in diocesan parishes, at the very least, and likely this would be issued well before this coming Easter, when ordinations and confirmations start happening in the church. It's a diabolical move to be sure, but not an unexpected one. We've seen this coming for some time. The report that a Traditionis Custodes 2 was in the works has been reported for the past few weeks out of Rome, and now we know that at the very least we should expect a crackdown on your life as a faithful Catholic in the coming months. And it begs the question, to what end is internal strife among traditionally minded Catholics being stirred up at the moment? It's all over the Catholic world right now, with the flames of internal division being flamed from nearly every quarter, and it has to be stopped. That is, it has to stop if those publicly engaging in it are honest brokers. If not, then we can guess that this is all being done at the behest of modernist Rome. Beware of anyone trying to keep you from the traditional sacraments in the face of these apostasy in the church. What do you think of all this? Is the move against seminaries and confirmation likely the next move? Let me know in the comments, please, and like and subscribe if you haven't. It really does help. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.